first saw it happen at work. I just finished ringing up a customer when every hair on my neck stood on end. Something in my peripheral vision caught my eye. I work at a board game store, and standing in an alcove peering at the game shelves was a skinny dude with a scraggly beard. His back was to me, but when he turned sideways, right at the edge of my vision, I could see his mouth was gaping wide open, like he was screaming. Weird, right? I glanced up, ready to laugh and ask him what was up, but the dude was just chilling, totally normal face. A slight wrinkle on his forehead, lips pursed as he read the back cover of Wingspan. He looked at me. "Yo, I keep hearing about this. Is it any good?" "Slightly overrated in my opinion," I replied. "But many people do seem to enjoy it. I'm trying to find a game my girlfriend might play. She's not really into board games and doesn't like competitive stuff. You have any good co-op games? Might I suggest a roll and write? Technically competitive, but you can't attack or interact with other players and mostly do your own thing on your board. They're also very beginner-friendly." I turned to grab one of the reserved ones from behind the counter, and as I turned back around, I nearly jumped out of my skin, because the man had approached so he was directly in front of the counter, and his mouth was wide open in a scream. Eyes wide, like he was a zombie about to bite me. But it must have been my imagination, because as soon as I looked at him straight on, he just looked back at me, mouth quirked. "You all right there, my dude?" he asked. Cartographers is our top-selling roll and write," I stammered, recovering myself. But every time I took my eyes away from his face, in my periphery, he seemed to be like one of the undead, a corpse with a gaping mouth. I decided to ignore his behavior in the hope that he'd stop. He placed an order for cartographers, and I told him I'd give him a call when his copy came in. As I took down his details, much to my annoyance, he did not stop, but continued to stand in my periphery, silently screaming. The next week, when I went in for a haircut, the guy sitting a couple of chairs over was also playing dead. He appeared to be slumped in the barber chair, head lolled to one side, blue eyes wide and unseeing. But the stylist kept flitting around him, scissors snipping, and when I turned to look at him directly, he was no longer playing dead, but instead speaking to the stylist, one hand gesturing from under the cape. Yet when I looked away a moment later, gone were his gestures. I could hear his voice, but he appeared to be lying motionless in his chair in the corner of my eye. A corpse. When my haircut was finished, and I looked over again, he was gone from the chair. This just kept happening. Honestly, I thought it must be some sort of online fad, with people randomly pretending to be dead. The internet has spawned stranger pranks. I don't have much of an online presence, and don't keep up with popular memes or TikTok trends, and in my head, it made sense. It remained a relatively rare occurrence for me, and mostly happened in large crowds. For example, the airport. That was where I finally figured out the cause. I was on my way to visit family, going through airport security. A little farther behind me in line stood a young couple who were pretending to be corpses whenever I stopped looking at them. It was annoying, and I kept turning my head quickly, hoping to catch them in the act, but they were always behaving normally the moment I looked directly at them. And of course, what should have tipped me off is that no one else in the line was reacting to their behavior. Only I could see it. But at that point, I was still acting under the assumption that everyone else was in on some new TikTok prank, and I wasn't. I'm 42, and definitely give "how do you do, fellow kids" vibes by today's social media standards. So anyway, I put my belongings on the conveyor belt, and the couple in my periphery were now 100% normal. Finally, I thought, they stopped pretending. But the moment I collected my stuff and turned around, I nearly shrieked because both of them loomed next to me, standing slouched, faces contorted into death masks. You can't see sharp details in your periphery, but you can catch when someone is making a terrible dead face. But when I looked at them head on to tell them to cut that shit out, they were both normal. staring at me like I was the weird one. The woman actually hid behind her partner. That's when I realized two things. One, that I was the source of the weirdness, and two, that more specifically, the source was in my stuff. I felt around in my pockets, my fingers closed on cold metal, and that's when it all clicked for me. I found my father's pocket watch. Now, a little background on this watch. Dad gave it to me the day before he died. It's cracked and doesn't run. He'd had it for as long as I can remember, and when I was little, I asked him why he always carried a broken watch. He told me it was a family heirloom, and that the cracks didn't matter because it told time in a different way. Those were his words. When he finally passed it down to me, he looked troubled as he told me, "I don't know if it's a blessing or a curse to be able to see the things it shows. My father told me to sell it, but I never could bring myself to." Dad was always very soft-spoken and polite. He ran an antiques shop that closed after he died. I think he wanted me to run it, but I never had the passion or the interest. Our lives just took different paths. The watch is the one antique he made sure to give to me. What I'm still trying to figure out is why, because as far as I can tell, there's no ambiguity about it. The damn thing is definitely cursed. See, once I knew the source was the watch, it all fell into place. At the end of that family trip, when I came back to work, I followed my hunch and looked up that guy who ordered the cartographer's game. He never came back to pick it up when it came in. I'd kept it sitting on the shelf for him, even though I should have just put it out on the main shelves for people to browse. It still had his name on it, and I searched his details, and right away found his obituary from that same week he'd come into the store. So, that's what Dad meant about the watch telling time in a different way. If I'd known what was going on back when the customer ordered the game, I could have warned him. Could have let him know. "Hey bud, maybe grab something that's in stock currently. Better yet, forget the games. Go do whatever it is you want to in your last hours of life. Start checking off that bucket list. Maybe buy something more meaningful, since it'll be your last chance to give your girlfriend a gift." But would he have listened? Looking back, I remember when I was a kid how things would happen with Dad that didn't make sense at the time. He'd get in random arguments with strangers. It was so uncharacteristic, because my father wasn't a confrontational man. Always polite. But once in a while at the antique store, I remember he'd step outside with a customer, and the customer would leave upset, yelling or swearing or hysterically sobbing, sometimes leaving so quickly they'd forgot whatever it was they'd purchased. And once, too, at the mall, Dad was told to leave a store after upsetting an employee. Stuff like that. Now I realize he must have tried to warn people. But did it actually help those people? Any of them? Is the watch a blessing or a curse? The watch wasn't always cracked. Somebody cracked it. Hurled it against a wall or the floor, maybe in a moment of frustration. Maybe my grandfather. But he didn't throw it away. He passed it to my dad. Now I wish Dad had sold it. Wish he'd given it to someone else. I know it's not his fault. Everyone has their time. But there are some things that maybe people are just better off not knowing. And maybe Dad thought warning people was the right thing. But I'm team curse on this one. Knowing is definitely a curse. I'd rather not know. I should have thrown this watch away. But like my father and his father before, I just didn't. Now it's too late. I'm sitting here at home, and every time I pass the bathroom mirror, every time I catch a glimpse of my reflection at the edge of my vision, it's just too late to unsee my own dead eyes staring back at me. At first I thought it was fun. We lived in an RV. It was like an endless vacation. One week we were in LA, the next we were in Salt Lake City. We didn't know much about our lives before this. We knew we were born in Portland and that we could never stop moving. We always knew we were a special family. I just guess we didn't know how special we were. My parents tried so hard to have kids and almost lost hope. That's why my twin sister and I were so special to them. They're little miracles. It was annoying, but at least we knew we meant something to them. Amelia and I were fairly close, as far as siblings go. We were kind of each other's only friends since we were homeschooled. We felt pretty isolated. We never set up camp anywhere fun. No KOA campgrounds with ice cream shops and swimming pools, always driving off-road and living deep in the woods. I guess it was peaceful, in a way, but anyone who grew up near the woods understand it's not something you mess with. The first time I really personally realized something was up was just before our 7th birthday, when we were staying in a place in BC called Kamloops. We weren't supposed to sneak out or leave Mom and Dad's sight, but at the time, we were mischievous 6-year-olds with a huge, unexplored forest in front of us. What do you expect? We waited until they fell asleep for the night and snuck out of the RV through the window, which was easy because the window was just a sheet of plastic held together by a zipper, and we set off with nothing but a shitty lantern to illuminate the path in front of us. It wasn't long before we saw something strange, a glow, not from our lantern. It was coming from in front of us. It didn't take long for us to see who or what was in front of us. It was a lady holding a small homemade torch. But she didn't look much like a lady. Her hair was matted and fallen out in some places. Her skin was almost blue and looked rotted. Her teeth were yellow and a few were missing, and I thought you could even see part of her jaw. She was wearing a dirty hospital gown. I didn't know where the nearest hospital was, but it had to be pretty damn far, because the last time I remember driving anywhere with a paved road had to be 3 hours before we set up our camp here. Amelia and I were frozen in fear, and for the first time since we had mutually decided affection towards siblings was lame, I reached for her hand. That thing reached out its bony arm to us. It moaned something almost indecipherable, like mabubu. That was enough to snap me out of it, and I sprinted away, dragging Amelia behind me. By some miracle, we had made it back to the RV, and by some other miracle, got back in without waking our parents. We didn't get much sleep, and were far too shaken up to even say good morning to our parents, let alone tell them what happened. Would they have even believed us if we told them? Well, after what happened next, I guess they would have to. When we opened the door to the RV, we saw that the remains of what we had left out overnight. A campfire reduced to ashes, the sticks covered in charcoal. Amelia and I had used to draw on the rocks, and a makeshift table with a few cans of beans had been utterly destroyed. It wasn't too out of the ordinary to have our camp ravished by animals. We lived in the woods after all, but this was something no animal could do. This looked set up, like whatever did it had a plan. What we saw written on the back of the RV confirmed this belief. In the charcoal sticks, someone had written, "You can't run forever," on our trailer. Mom made us breakfast while Dad cleaned up the mess. We left shortly after that and drove for hours, not even stopping for quick washroom breaks. Mom and Dad spoke in hushed whispers as Dad drove. I wish I knew what they had been talking about. That night, I guess because Mom and Dad could see we were shaken up, they took us for a rare treat. A dinner at a real restaurant, a shitty diner, but a restaurant nonetheless. It was empty there, which was why my parents liked it, as they hated crowds. I was over the moon. A root beer float and a greasy cheeseburger was anything a 6-year-old boy could dream of. Which was why I was so upset when Mom and Dad made us leave the second someone else came in. It was just an old trucker. I didn't get the big deal. While we were in the RV, Amelia asked why we had to leave while I sulked in my bunk, a glorified shelf. Mom sighed. I suppose you two are almost 7. That's old enough to know. Well, Zachary, Amelia, the reason we had to leave is because we're scared of losing you. Do you remember what happened when you were 4? I had no idea. My memory was never good, but Amelia claimed to remember. We were in Beaverton, not too far from Portland. She said that when we were 4, we were running around in a field when a big man in camouflage and bit boots came up to us and bent down to our level. "We're not supposed to talk to strangers," Amelia said. She was always a goody two-shoes. "I'm John. Now we're not strangers. What are your names?" "I'm Zach, and that's my sister Amelia. We're 4, and our birthday is July 26th, 2002. I had apparently said, but I bet Amelia just said I said that to make me look worse. That's when he stopped smiling. He roughly took our hands and started to lead us away. "Let's go somewhere fun, Zach and Amelia. I need to take you someplace else." My mom got teary. "That's right. If your dad and I hadn't caught you just before you left, we probably would have never seen you again. I took you to someplace safe, and your dad, well, your dad. I shot that son of a bitch in the leg. Hope he had fun crawling back to his house," he said coldly. Amelia and I shot each other glances. "Okay, Daddy, I'm going to go to sleep now," she said, climbing over me to get to her bunk. That night we stopped somewhere for the night. I forgot where, probably near the interior of BC, or maybe Alberta. I looked out the little plastic window, and I saw her. I saw that fucking lady again. She was staring at me and Amelia in our bunk beds, reaching out for us with that same long, bony hand. I rolled over and tried to sleep, but couldn't, knowing she was there. Life continued on like that for a while. Anywhere we'd stop, she'd be there. Washington, there she was. Nevada, you bet your ass. Montana, better fucking believe it. Amelia and I didn't really explore much anymore, partially because we were getting older and gradually showing less interest in that sort of thing, but partially because that experience in Kamloops traumatized us both. That didn't stop the lady from trying to get us. Sometimes we'd catch a glimpse of her on the highway as we drove by. Sometimes she'd appear right where the fire of our campsite stopped illuminating, so we could barely see her. On the rare occasion we went into public to get supplies or food, I could have sworn I caught a glimpse of her in the crowd. Whenever she was around, I always heard that damn cry of hers. "Muh, boo, boo." After a while, she stopped scaring me. Well, as much. Everything finally made sense the day before Amelia and I turned 14. Mom and Dad had left the RV and gave us two a rare couple of hours of freedom as they gathered things for our birthday. We weren't parked ridiculously far from civilization, but I'd say a good hour's worth of walking. We weren't that scared. We had lived in the woods long enough to know, as long as you didn't bother the forest, it wouldn't bother you. And the lady in the hospital gown was honestly more of an annoyance than anything else. I'd even go so far to say we had almost forgotten about her. I was reading, and Amelia was rummaging around the RV for food. I was getting immersed in my book when Amelia shouted out, "Zach, come check this out." I rolled my eyes. What could it be? We had lived in this tiny RV for almost 14 years. I knew it like the back of my hand. There was absolutely no nook or cranny I didn't know about. Oh, I guess I was wrong. There, under the driver's seat cushion Amelia had pulled out, for some reason, was a box. It was small and a bit squished from all the years of my dad's ass sitting on it, but we could still tell what it was. Amelia excitedly reached to open it. Inside were papers. "Forget about it, Amelia. It's probably just boring documents for work," I said, but the look of confusion to horror on my sister's face was enough to change my mind. They were documents, but not for work. Birth documents, for us. But the stated parents weren't ours. I was apparently Zachary Jr., but nobody in my family was named Zachary. I looked at the father's name, Zachary. The mother was someone named Emily. Maybe we were adopted, I suggested. Amelia reached in and pulled out another sheet of paper. She shook her head and held out the next one for me with a shaky hand. "Infants missing from Portland Hospital. July 27th, 2002. Twins, Zachary, Christopher, Clark Jucher, and Amelia, Emily Clark. Ongoing search. Anyone with information is to report it to the police immediately. Clark, Christopher. Those weren't our names. Our last name was Brown, and our parents certainly weren't Zachary and Emily. They were Jenny and Kevin. I had a feeling things were going to get worse. I was right, as Amelia pulled out the third and second to last paper. Portland mother of 2, murdered in hospital. Emily Clark, 27, had recently given birth to twins, now missing, when she was smothered to death in her own hospital bed. Police drawing of suspects. We looked at the police drawing. It was obviously not a complete match, but they were basically the only other 2 faces we had seen our entire lives. Mom and Dad. CCTV footage shows the 2 suspects leaving the hospital through a back door with the 2 infants. Search is ongoing. If spotted, do not approach these individuals. Alert the authorities immediately. We were silent as Amelia shakily grabbed the last piece of paper. This was from 2006. We were 4. After an Oregon man allegedly spotted the missing kids and was attacked by the perpetrators, a glimpse of hope is seen in this 4-year-long cold case. Father and husband of the victims, Zachary Clark, shares this message. To my babies, I have no idea where you 2 are, but I will never let go of hope that one day I will see your beautiful faces again. You may not even know who I am, but that doesn't change anything. Until we meet again, Daddy loves you. We couldn't even say anything. What do you even say to that? We just stood in silence for a while. Then, we heard a banging on the RV. We jumped and looked outside. It was the lady in the hospital gown, closer than ever. We could see her bluish gray skin. We could see her hazel eyes. They kind of looked like Amelia's. "Mo, boo, boo," she moaned, reaching out for us again. I looked down to the newspaper clipping. It had a picture of the victim on it. I held it up to the window, where she was staring at us. "Moo, boo, boo," she said again. "Ma, boo, boo." My baby. All this time, she had just wanted her babies. Amelia stepped out of the RV. I was scared at first, but this day couldn't get any crazier, so I followed. "Mama?" she asked, tears in her eyes. "Bubba," she said, reaching her bony hand out once again, but she didn't run. She let her touch her face, as she gently rubbed her hand across her cheek. She did the same to me, but then pointed in the direction of the nearest town. Go, she said. "Go. Why?" Amelia asked. "Dada," our mother croaked. Dad, Zachary Sr. Was he still alive? After all this time? "We have 2 hours until Mom and Dad." Amelia cut herself off. "They get back. Let's go. Quick." Although we really didn't have any idea how to get to the town, we somehow knew. Like someone was guiding us. We busted into the sheriff's office, probably looking awful. First came the questioning, then the DNA testing. Then they looked for our parents. Then they arrested my parents. Then the news stories and the interviews. Then we were flown out in a plane, my first plane ever, to Portland, to meet our dad. We were quite the story. They called my parents the wretches of the woods. They thought of them as evil witches who stole us and hid us deep in the woods. I guess they were right, in a way. It was weird seeing them behind bars, serving life sentences, because after all, they raised us for nearly 14 years. But that's where they'll stay. No running, no hiding. There's nowhere to hide in a cell. He burst into tears when he saw us. We didn't. It was weird. He was my dad and all, but was he? I mean, I guess I met him when I was like a few hours old, but I just couldn't connect to him. It took a while, but we slowly got used to our new lives, in a house with a bed and our own rooms, not running from everything or living in the woods. It was peaceful, although most of the time I ended up sneaking into Amelia's room because after all this time, I still couldn't be alone. One time I got a knock on our window. We both woke up and saw the lady in the hospital gown outside. But she looked happier, less rotten, like she was complete again. "Mama," I asked, "could she stay? And I could live with the family I craved?" Like she read my mind, she shook her head. "I have to go. My babies," she said, reaching her hand out to us through the window as she slowly disappeared into the night. We never saw her again after that, but we always knew she was watching us. But this time, we wouldn't run. "Hurry up in the shower. We have to leave soon." I yelled towards the bathroom at my husband. Every year, at some point in the days leading up to Christmas, our families get together. We were already making bad timing when he realized he needed a shower. I had misplaced my earrings, paranoid about making us even later. As I walked past the bathroom, I noticed the door wide open. My husband stood there, still naked from having recently departed the shower. He had draped a pastel orange towel over his head, one that I didn't even know we owned. It didn't cross my mind at the time, just a fleeting thought. He swayed gently from side to side, like a swinging pendulum. I giggled. "Stop being silly. You know we're running late." "Have you seen my earrings?" Immediately upon entering the bedroom, I spotted them gently glistening on the bedside table. Relieved, I yelled again, "Never mind, found them." As I put the first in, my gaze fell directly ahead of me, at the painting of a lighthouse hung on our bedroom wall. My husband was never a stranger to local markets. He almost had a talent for buying the strangest items. I've grown used to it, but this painting always stood out to me as a bizarre purchase. The lighthouse stands as the subject, with a series of indistinct, colorful blobs painted around the bottom, a crowd of nondescript people, I had always assumed. On the frame, at the bottom, a title or note or quote of some kind had been etched in. "The Jolly Good Fellows." My trail of thought was cut short as I failed to get the second earring in. I had stabbed myself slightly and began to head to the bathroom for the assistance of the mirror. He was still standing there, swaying. "Honey, we really need to go soon. Please get ready." I approached the mirror. Seeing no blood, I breathed a sigh of relief and put the second earring in. The whole time, from the corner of my eye, I could still see him swaying. The towel blocked any view of his head. My patience was wearing thin. Had he even sorted his clothes out yet? "Honey, come on," I spoke as I lifted the towel from his face. Peering under, I expected to see him smiling, acting playfully. I felt a little bad, but being ever aware of the ticking clock, sometimes I have to remind him to have urgency, even when he's just playing around. His eyes were wide, his face emotionless. He stared forward as though there wasn't a wall a few feet from his face, like he was looking just a little past everything. He stopped swaying as the towel was removed, but remained in this state. I gently held his hand. "Come with me. Let's sit down." I knew something was wrong. As I guided him to the bed and sat him down, his arm felt limp, as though his muscles were void of any connection to the brain. "Let's get you some clothes, okay? We can talk about what's wrong." I tried to speak calmly as I turned around and searched through the wardrobe. I began asking questions, trying to take his mind off of things. My mind, while still aware of the time, was now more focused on my husband's well-being. Noticing a lack of answers or responses, I turned back to face him. Have you ever jumped at the lack of something? Usually, we jump at the sudden presence of something we were not expecting. Perhaps the sudden movement of an object we thought would remain motionless. But when I saw my husband wasn't behind me, my body jolted slightly. I hadn't heard him move or felt him walk past me. I expected him to still be on the bed. The lack thereof was enough of a shift to shock me. "Honey," I yelled slightly, wondering where he was. I walked past the bathroom. There he was, orange towel draped over his head, swaying gently at the same rhythm as before. "If you don't respond to me, I'm calling an ambulance." I needed a quick answer. My mind jumped straight to some form of brain injury, perhaps from falling over in the shower. I knew that acting fast is the only chance you have to minimize damage. He didn't answer. I removed the towel from his head as I dialed emergency services. Again, he stopped swaying. As I explained everything to them, I watched as he knelt down, picked the towel back up, and draped it back over his head. The swaying continued thereafter. Paramedics arrived shortly. He put up no fight and allowed them to escort him to the ambulance in a wheelchair. I kept asking questions about whether he'd be okay. They had to keep assuring me that whilst the hospital would do everything they could, they had no information to go off of. My racing mind looked past this and continued to ask similar questions regardless. He kept trying to stand up whilst en route to the hospital, yet would be compliant when gently pushed back down. As long as someone was guiding him, he would follow. When this stopped, would he try to move? The same had happened back home. He only got up and left once I had sat him down and let go of him. Through the sound of the sirens wailing overhead, the bumps of the ambulance's journey, and trying to hold back my tears, I could hear a familiar tune. My husband, showing almost no other signs of activity, was gently humming. I leaned in to get a better listen. It was a very low tone, and each note seemed to begin as a hum, yet end as more of a raspy breath. Each one seemed to continue for slightly longer than they were supposed to. But I recognized this tune. He was humming, "For he's a jolly good fellow." Arriving at the hospital felt like a blur. Everyone knew exactly where they were going. I was following along, completely lost in this maze of signs and painted lines intended to guide. We had left the ambulance and arrived at his assigned bed before I could process what was happening. As soon as he was laid down, the confusing blur continued. "Ma'am, could we borrow you in the next room? We just need you to fill out some paperwork." "Not until I know if my husband is okay," I snapped. "We understand, but the best chance at survival is if we understand everything. This paperwork will take care of some of that." I was assured that a doctor would be in the room shortly and that my husband was in good hands. I shouldn't have listened. They certainly didn't. I explained that he kept trying to get up and walk about, but they clearly underestimated. I hadn't even helped the lady fill out my husband's personal information before we were informed that he was missing. "He can't be far. Keep an eye on all entrances." The staff spoke to each other urgently. I was asked to remain calm and continue helping with the paperwork, but I refused. I attempted to run around the hospital to join the search, but was quickly told that I don't have the authority to be wandering around alone. I hardly cared. My husband was the only thing on my mind, but I didn't want to be escorted out and risk not seeing him at all when he's found. I took my efforts outside the hospital. I looked around the parking area and then the nearby streets. After an hour and a half, I was still wandering, with no word from the hospital of any findings in the building. I began to walk home, hoping that somehow he had remembered the way. It was a 20-minute walk. I could not imagine that he had survived in his state, let alone managed to correctly identify the entire journey home. But it was worth a shot. I arrived to find our front window smashed. No glass on the pavement below told me that somebody had broken in. Perhaps I should have been more cautious, but I just wanted to know if my husband was inside. My hand shook as I struggled to get the key into the lock. Once I did, I turned the handle and ran inside. I don't think I even closed the door behind me. "Honey, are you here?" I don't know if I was surprised to see what I saw or whether I expected this. There he was, in the bathroom, orange towel draped over his head, swaying gently. This time, a pool of blood collected on the tiled floor below, dripping from his right arm. Cuts on his legs and torso told the full story. He had no concept of pain. He smashed the window to get in, to get back to this exact spot. The injuries meant nothing to him. For whatever reason, his mind was focused only on anchoring itself in that bathroom, under the gentle weight of a towel. Crying, I approached him and lifted the towel slightly. I hardly even noticed the blood soaked into it. His eyes were red. Had he even blinked since this began? The humming continued. I should have contacted emergency services immediately, but instead, I just stood there. I stared into his eyes, pretending he was staring back into mine. I wanted him back. Gently, he lifted an arm and pulled the towel back down over his face. I don't know how long I stood there sobbing. Please, talk to me. I love you. The gentle humming would have been comforting, but the slight inconstancy of the rhythm was a subtle reminder that my husband had no awareness. I thought back to all our recent conversations, everything we've ever done together. Lately, he's had a fascination with the ocean. I could never understand it. A horizon swallowed by the forever swaying and crashing of waves never appealed to me. He used to tell me all sorts of facts. One that particularly disturbed me was an old tradition of placing a towel over the faces of sailors who had passed whilst at sea. Once back on the shore, you'd place a towel over their face as you waited for somebody to arrive with help or a hearse. Curiosity having a moment of breakthrough as I grieved my still-living husband, I went into the bedroom. I took a closer look at the painting. The blobs at the bottom of the lighthouse, I had always assumed them to be nondescript people with little detail added, though I had never understood why the blobs were so colorful. Only then did I realize they were not a crowd gathering at the bottom of the lighthouse. They were dozens of bodies laid out on the shore. Pastel-colored towels were draped over their faces. Perhaps my husband is there now, forever visiting the lighthouse, staring into the horizon as it's swallowed by the ocean.